I'm Sandy Starr, and I'm Deputy Director of the Progress Educational Trust, or PET, an independent charity that seeks to improve choices for people who are affected by infertility or genetic conditions. I'm very pleased today to be speaking to Simon Wilde, who is Engagement Director at Genomics England. And the main reason we're speaking today is because a report has just been published, commissioned by Genomics England and other bodies, and this report concerns public dialogue about implications of whole genome sequencing for newborn screening. So Simon, to start with, can you remind us briefly what Genomics England is and what it does?
So Genomics England has been around for several years now, and it was originally created to carry out the 100,000 Genomes project, which was a big project looking at how we could use whole genome sequencing, in particular in people with rare disease and in people with certain types of cancer.
PET's work relates to fertility and assisted conception, as well as genetics and genomics, and the term screening can sometimes be used to mean different things in that world. So to avoid confusion, can we just clarify what's meant by screening in the context of newborn screening and this new report?
Screening in this context was about the newborn screening process that takes place soon after birth, where you are looking at broad swathes of the population and you are looking for signs or indications that a child or anyone else may have a particular condition or disease before they've shown any clinical signs, any symptoms of that particular condition, so that you can do something about it earlier.
And why is Genomics England interested in newborn screening?
For quite a few years now, scientists and particularly ethicists have been debating this issue. Back in 2005, when the government were looking at how genomics could be used in a healthcare system, a report by, I think it was the Human Genetics Commission and some others, concluded that actually, particularly in a newborn context, it was still way too expensive and way too difficult to do this, and probably would be the case for the next 20 years or so. And so we're now nearly 20 years on in that. With the 100,000 Genomes project, you were asking people who already had a condition or a particular illness or things that were wrong with them, for which we didn't really have much of an answer for, and asking them to take part. With newborn screening, you're ostensibly going to otherwise healthy children and deliberately looking for things that might be wrong.
So this new report concerns a public dialogue commissioned by Genomics England and other bodies. What did this public dialogue entail and whom did it involve?
A public dialogue is a process that you create where members of the public interact with scientists, with stakeholders, with other policymakers to deliberate on issues that are relevant to future decisions that government or public bodies might make. So it's a way in which you can have some really constructive conversations among various diverse groups of citizens on topics which are often complex, controversial. We had specialists from an organisation called Hopkins Van Mill to come and run the sessions, and it involved around 130 people over the course of a couple of months, coming along to a regular series of workshops and seminars to hear from experts, to talk amongst themselves. During one of the sessions, one of the women went into labour and continued to the end of the session, and we were joined by her baby in subsequent sessions.
That's a wonderful story. Since there were diverse groups of people involved, did people's views and ideas on the subject, did those also tend to diverge, or did they sort of converge on some sort of consensus?
Almost without exception, people, were fascinated by the topic, were really impressed with the range of different voices they heard on various different, aspects of the topic that we were discussing. That initial exposure to, what genomics might be able to do and what newborn screening, there were possibilities from that are, enormous fascination in the process, and, a great deal of optimism about how groundbreaking and how useful this technology might be. But then as you begin to introduce some of the ethical dilemmas about consent and about information provision and about how much more genomics can tell you about your family as much as yourself if you're the one having your genome sequenced, that initial optimism being met with then a kind of, oh, actually, yes, this is much more complex than you would perhaps think about in the first place. We'd like you to kind of explore this in detail, but there are a number of things that we would like to see around, the kind of support that is made available, the making sure that the consent process is transparent and people know what they're getting themselves into. The devil is in the detail a little bit, for example, in terms of having access to information that might be gained from your genome. There are perhaps two extremes. One is the kind of ignorance is bliss kind of thing, whereas if you're finding something about me, I don't really want to know about it, I want to go on and live my life, as opposed to the other extreme, which is the kind of knowledge is power type thing, which is, if there's something that you can find out about me from my genome, I want to know it all, whether it's something you can do something about or not. And so, trying to make sure that you understand that there is, divergence in opinion, that there isn't, one single truth or consensus on the way to do things.
I suppose one challenge is that a genome is a sort of fixed sequence. What implications it has, what we know about the sequence, what it implies for our health, that knowledge is constantly evolving. And so you may be told something different tomorrow on the basis of your genome than you were at the time it was originally sequenced.
Absolutely, and I think there's so many different dimensions to the topics that we discussed as part of the dialogue. In terms of the limitations of our knowledge currently on genomics and how that might change over time as we get to know more about how genes affect our health. Issues around kind of the uncertainty or the penetrance of various different things. So just because you've spotted something in a genome that's a variant that's different from other people, the extent to which that will definitely make you ill or not is still something that scientists are doing a lot of research on. And again, going back to this concept of people differing in the kind of ways or reasons about whether they want to know about information that you can find in their genome or not is yet another kind of axis in terms of understanding how generally people think about the use of genomics.
Knowledge about genomics changes, but also the world that creates policies and laws about genomics also changes. Governments rise and fall, laws are passed and then revoked. And presumably that's yet another aspect that people had to keep in mind.
Genome data will be around for a long time if you choose to have it sequenced. How do we make sure that we protect against changes in government, changes in lots of laws, or changes in the ways in which we decide to do things and developments in science? And that was a real theme, that how can we do the best we can to make sure that the thing that you signed up for in the first place is the thing that eventually happens. And there's lots of safeguards that you can put in place already. You can make sure that whenever someone decides that they no longer want to have their data analyzed and don't want to be part of the research project anymore, that they can do so quickly and easily, through to working with government to make sure that legislation is future proofed and that the safeguards and assurances that were put in place at the start don't disappear or change as time goes by.
I suppose it doesn't hurt that the fight against COVID has involved quite a complex interplay between government and public sector on the one hand and the private sector on the other. You can't really see us arriving at the sort of solutions to COVID that we have without those different parts in play. And I suppose the picture around genomics and healthcare is similarly complex.
Whereas before it was quite a binary, public sector good, private sector bad in terms of access to data for research. I think COVID has shown us that actually, the public can have some very nuanced views and nuanced observations. The Wellcome Trust report on the one-way mirror, which was about kind of, what it is that makes people feel more reassured about commercial access to data, is a really interesting read. It tells you a lot about how the public make decisions about their ease or unease of commercial access to personal data. They're interested primarily in the public benefit or the overall benefit that this kind of research using commercial companies might do. And if that's not there and that's not in place, then all of the other things that they consider don't really play a part. So that that fundamental thing about understanding what the ultimate benefit to society and to humans might be is the most important thing. The fact that all of this dialogue, all of this discussion took place in the backdrop of the hunt for a vaccine, the fact that, the name of a pharmaceutical company was in the news every day because AstraZeneca had made the vaccine that we were all backing, added to the kind of complexities of the discussion, but actually made for some really interesting findings as well.
Now that the public dialogue has been distilled into a report, what are the key findings or the key messages of this report?
Participants are generally really supportive of the potential use of whole genome sequencing in newborns, but with the kind of really strong caveat that they expect that proper consideration is going to be given to the designing and the planning of any future use of this technology. And this includes making sure that the public are involved in integration of the technology into any future kind of healthcare or research or newborn screening program, and that the right kinds and the appropriate resources, investment and safeguards are in place. Participants were very interested in the concept of using whole genome sequencing for newborn screening, and their kind of view was generally that it should identify a wider set of conditions than the current NHS newborn screening programme, but only if there are treatments and interventions to cure or prevent or slow progression of the conditions. And I think the interesting thing they also pulled out from that was that there is also a lot of potential for whole genome sequencing in newborn screening to bring health benefits to parents, to siblings, and to the wider family as well as the baby. One of the really strong things that came out of the dialogue was that genetic counselling in particular, and also mental health assistance, must be available for those who receive a confirmed diagnosis to help them understand the health condition, and also to provide emotional and psychological support. The participants talked about making sure that a comprehensive genetic database should be established so that people from ethnic minority backgrounds in particular are not disadvantaged by receiving more uncertain or less accurate diagnosis than the rest of the population from newborn screening, and that the accuracy in diagnosis for everyone is improved. And that the full complexities of this process must be recognised when designing consent. If consent is sought for whole genome sequencing data to be used for research, the data must be de-identified and used to deliver improved diagnosis, treatments and care.
And finally, what's going to happen now that this report has been published? Are there plans for further public discussion or dialogue?
We've been really keen to make sure that people understand, both the participants in the dialogue themselves, but also, the kind of wider scientific, medical and larger communities, that this is just the start of a process. Obviously, with a topic as tricky and as controversial as using whole genome sequencing as part of a newborn screening process, there are lots and lots of things that we need to understand more about. We need to make sure that the scientific rationale, the medical rationale, the ethical rationale for doing anything in this particular area needs to be absolutely watertight. And the dialogue has given us such a great grounding in understanding what it is that the public are concerned about, what their expectations are. This is just the start of some more detailed public dialogue, particularly as we start to develop our plans for what a future service might look like, so we can go back with the public and discuss that with them. The sequencing of the genome and the scientific analysis of it is essentially the easy part of all this. It's making sure that, as with any new NHS service or any new way of doing things, that we think about the entire process right from the start, when people are being approached to potentially take part in either a pilot or a rollout of this kind of technology in healthcare, all the way through to the support and the clinical pathways that need to be put in place to make sure that actually the benefits can be fully realised.
Well, thank you very much, Simon, for discussing the report with me today. Clearly, it marks the beginning of a wider public conversation, and we at PET very much look forward to listening to and contributing to that conversation. Thank you.